Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina Smarecki, and I'm the events manager at Newspire. I'll be your host for this live session. Today's webinar, The Anatomy of a Threat Hunt, features two of our veteran frontline threat hunters, and it's all about showing you today's threat hunting process. So if you're looking to learn a little bit about threat hunting today, you're in the right place. For a little bit of fun and in the spirit of giving back, we will be giving away some Giving Good gift cards to 5 lucky registrants. Winners can enjoy a gift on us while supporting the Habitat for Humanity charity. So watch your email. I'll be emailing the winners in the coming days. If anyone has questions during today's webinar, please submit them in the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. Also, there's a different tab for the chat, so feel free to use the chat tab. You can go ahead and let us know where you're joining in from today. Also, as a reminder, you will all receive a follow-up email with a link to watch the recording today. So don't worry about having to take a lot of notes. You can watch it whenever you want later. So at this time, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today, Lori Mincer and Todd Reeder. Lori is Newspire's manager of the threat hunting team, and she oversees threat hunts for adversary activity that are undetected by traditional methodologies. Lori has over 30 years of experience, 10 of those years in cybersecurity and computer forensics. Todd is Newspire's principal threat hunter on Lori's team. He has 16 years of cybersecurity experience and assumed various roles before joining the threat hunt team, including SOC analyst, log collection and parsing engineer, and SIM administrator. So before I hand this over to our speakers, we'd like to get your input on our poll. The question reads, do you use threat hunting measures as a part of your security program? So I'm going to go ahead and publish the poll, launch the poll there. Everyone should be able to see that on their screen. And go ahead and just choose your answer. Yes, you have an internal threat hunting team. Yes, you use a third party. No, you're not doing any threat hunting. Or what is threat hunting? So I'm going to actually just leave the poll open as we have more people join in, and we'll come back to the results later in the webinar. So now I will turn it over to Lori and Todd.
Thank you very much, Gina. I think this last question, I skipped over a slide real quick. What is threat hunting? In our industry, threat hunting may have multiple definitions. We define threat hunting as the human behind the keyboard that's searching for undetected threats that have evaded your traditional security solutions. If you're familiar with the pyramid of pain, you may recognize some of the IOCs listed on the left. A threat hunter's hypothesis usually includes one of these IOCs. In our webinar today, Todd and I are going to talk about a hunt that focused on a TTP, and that hunt involved persistence. Persistence is one method adversaries use to maintain access to an environment after it's been compromised. Some methods of persistence can include WMI persistence, modifying registry keys, adding to a startup folder, and scheduled tasks. Todd's scheduled hunt sought to answer a question around persistence. There are many different names for hunts in the world of threat hunting. We categorize 3 different types of hunts. A scheduled hunt is a hypothesis-based hunt that's built by our hunters. Their hypothesis may be based on research that they've done, threats in the news, or prior experience. A hypothesis typically starts with a question, and the investigation is conducted to answer that question. An ad hoc hunt is one that's created by our threat intelligence team, and usually it's created following some research that they've been doing. And the last hunt listed on the slide is a follow-on hunt. This is a deep dive hunt that is specific to an environment. If one of more of the criteria from the other 2 hunts is identified, our hunters will create a follow-on hunt, information that's specific to the environment, hunts that or queries and the results of those queries, anything specific to the environment and that hunt are documented in that ticket. So as I said earlier, there are many references to hunts. The first one in this slide, a historical hunt, is just as it implies. The hunter, or actually it can be an analyst, is looking for prior events, past events that may have happened in order to answer those questions. Other threat terms are attack-based hunts, also known as IOC-based hunts, and adversary hunts. An adversary hunt is more specific to threat groups than tactics and techniques. Next up, we'll look at an example of some of the phases in an adversary's life cycle.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. So now that we've categorized our hunts, it can be helpful to see how different techniques feed into each other. So this example from Microsoft is an example of an attack on Exchange servers and how different techniques were used to achieve an adversary's goal. This is really just one possibility. The flow here can change and often does. For example, reconnaissance typically happens prior to an attack, and again, every time an adversary gains access to a new resource. So learning what permissions a user has, what applications are running on a computer, what other internal IP addresses can be reached, etc. So my work as a threat hunter, I use several different models to help guide investigations and point me in directions that I may not have looked yet. Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain, MITRE's attack framework, and the diamond model for an intrusion analysis are all useful when defining or expanding a hunt, and come in handy too when it's time to document to help really tell that story. So in a bit, as Lori has alluded to, we'll be going through an example of a persistence hunt that I did. But before we do that, we should look at some of the questions that we ask before and during a hunt. Lori?
Thanks, Todd. So there are a lot of questions that are asked. We just captured the last four or the top four. What are you looking for? We're looking for answers to support what we've identified as anomalous, malicious, or suspicious. And many times, one question may lead to many more questions. They kind of can bring you down that rabbit hole. And where do you look and what kind of data sources are you using in your investigation? I'll cover some of those data sources in the upcoming slides. And what are the other types of analysis that you use? There are many different types of analysis. Visual analysis, which would be maybe a pie chart or a bar graph. Temporal analysis, which is really focused around time. And pivot tables are just a few that we use. Sorry, my screen froze. So let's talk about data sources. I mentioned those in the prior slide. Where do we look and what data sources? We look at firewall, proxy, Windows event logs, IDS, IPS logs. These are typically fed into a SIM, which parses that raw data. The more data sources that are sent into a SIM, the better visibility a threat hunter has into the activity of a user, an endpoint, or processes. When a threat hunter has two or more data sources to hunt in, they may be able to correlate activity that's identified or find answers to help determine if the activity is malicious or not. For example, if activity to a malicious IP was observed, but the firewall is the only data source that the SIM is receiving events from, other questions such as the username, what process may have started that, where was it started from, are not anything that would be known to the threat hunter and cannot be investigated. In addition to firewall, IDS, IPS, and Windows event logs, are cloud logs and application logs. Adding these data sources in addition to other data I previously mentioned provide a hunter much more visibility into an environment and allow further correlation of the activity. I'd like to highlight, though, the last section on this slide, host logs, also known as EDR logs. They contain detailed information around processes, and this information is a great resource that may assist the hunter in multiple ways, such as identifying activity that may have been spawned from a malicious document, drive-by download, or suspicious file execution that may have been started from a temporary folder or another unusual location. On the right side of this slide is a simplified example of a legitimate Windows file, explorer.exe, spawning several other files. When looking at this explorer.exe, spawning command.exe or outlook.exe may not appear anomalous. PowerShell spawning PowerShell off of the command.exe is definitely something that would warrant an investigation. But enough about the high level stuff. Let's get into hearing about Todd's hunt.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. So a big part of being a threat hunter is staying current, watching news, reading really anything I can get my hands on what's going on. And through that research, found that a common persistence technique that was used by multiple malware families and threat actors was the creation of window scheduled tasks. But I didn't want to leave it there. Typically, I find that the more specific you can be during a hunt, the better. Leads to more actionable results and fewer false positives. So some tasks that get created will stand out. An adversary will use a randomly generated string as a task name. When they do that, anybody looking at Task Manager will see that and have a pretty good indication that something is wrong. Whereas if they were to use, say, a GUID instead, it would take a few more clicks to determine if that was malicious or not. The reason being is lots of legitimate services use GUIDs in their task name, including Microsoft Group Policy. So run my initial query, see all that group policy stuff, filter it out, rinse and repeat until I get a real small subset of events that I can then take a closer look at and determine if they're malicious. So what did this hunt uncover? It found forensic artifacts, things like the configuration file that was created for the scheduled task. That points to files that were written to disk. And continuing to follow the chain, we find malicious email attachments, potentially registry keys to maintain additional persistence. It just varies. So the screenshot on the right, and I know it's small, is another instance of a GUID scheduled task, this time starting calc.exe, which was used by Tarask to run further malicious actions. There's some interesting techniques with calc.exe these days. On one machine in particular, though, excuse me, I found a malicious email attachment that turned out to be CACBot that was then used to install a Cobalt Strike beacon. That combo is pretty common, but it's not always the case. So it's important to follow where the evidence points. And that's, in a nutshell, how threat hunting and the processes behind it work, the things that we go through. You can see there on the screen, this particular scheduled hunt turned up 20 hosts that were interesting, I'll say, from the point of there was something on the endpoint that needed further review. So we'll escalate to the client with the details about what was found, what we think is going on. In some cases, if we didn't have enough to say for certain that it was in fact malicious, we'll give them recommendations on where to look next. In the case of the CACBot Cobalt Strike host, we know that's that machine is a problem. It needs to be taken care of as soon as possible. So again, that was just a quick review of a hunt and the processes around it. So let's take a look at those poll results. Gina, how'd those turn out?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you both for going through that presentation and an example of a threat hunt. So let me go back to the poll now and I'll end it. Hopefully everyone had a chance to cast their vote. It looks like we got a decent amount of responses. So I'm going to share the results here. All right, so it looks like the majority by 38% said yes, they use a third party to threat hunt in their environment. So that is super interesting to see what kind of audience we have on today. But also 31%, they don't leverage any threat hunting. So any comments on that, Lori?
Sorry about that. I couldn't get my mic to work. So it's rather interesting, the not having any threat hunting in an environment makes it something you want to look forward to maturing a threat hunt program. Knowing your environment is one key area. Experienced hunters is another, and having an EDR as well as a SIM to ingest all those logs is a third. Knowing your environment is something that I like to divert to my threat hunter to describe to the extent that may not be known.
Yeah, I mean, take a page from those adversary playbooks, run scans to identify network ranges and IPs in use. I've seen numerous networks that kind of grow organically. When that happens, IP ranges get missed, sometimes forgotten about, sometimes whole buildings get lost. Use tools like Bloodhound to understand Active Directory users and groups and how the relationships are formed between them, and work to limit access where you can.
Well, thank you. Experienced threat hunters. So not every SOC has threat hunters, but many people may have analysts. And depending on their skill set and their investigative curiousness, they could become threat hunters. There are some key things you could allow that security analyst to do. Give them an alert and see how far back they can identify information on. And then EDR and SIM being beneficial together. EDR is great from the standpoint that it collects the detailed logs for processes and it will show users and hashes and such. But if that is the only data source feeding into, say, a SIM, then that's only a single source. So in the third bullet where we have EDR and SIM is beneficial, other logs such as the Windows event logs, firewall logs, any of those that I mentioned prior, in addition to the EDR logs, are very beneficial in maturing your threat hunt program. There's also some things that those analysts can do, such as capture the flag. Right now, KringleCon for SANS, if anybody's got a SANS account, KringleCon just started. There are also places like TryHackMe or Hack the Box that also you can do capture the flags, either for a minimal fee or some of them are free.
Unmute myself. Thank you for that. And so now would be a good time if anyone has any questions to put them into the Q&A. Looks like we'll have a few minutes to take any questions from the audience. But real quick, I'd like to mention our next webinar. And I will go ahead and turn this, put this link in the chat for everyone in case you're interested in January 17th. we will have a all-star panel lineup giving their cybersecurity predictions for 2023. So I put that link in the chat box. If anyone is interested in registering, they can go ahead and do that. Also, we have a couple threat hunting related articles. Actually, one's a checklist and one is a blog, I think. So let me put those links in here as well. You guys can click on those. Oh, give me a second here. Oh, everyone. And I will get those links shortly here. All right, here is the checklist. Sorry for the delay. And here is the blog.
And I apologize, my mouse button stuck, so I jumped slides on you.
No worries. Okay, I see a couple questions coming in. So we'll go right into those. So Stuart, I see your question. If you're still on, I'm actually going to defer. You're asking about a specific client program of ours and some certain regulations. I'm going to defer that to a different department, but I have taken note of that. The next question is, does Newspire offerings of SentinelOne help with any of this, and when would a threat hunter get involved? Any thoughts on that, Lori?
So does SentinelOne help on this? I'm assuming the company SentinelOne as itself or SentinelOne as the EDR. I'll answer this as the EDR since that's my scope of knowledge. SentinelOne does help tremendously. We use SentinelOne in hunts as well as investigating potential alerts to find activity on endpoints. Some of the things that SentinelOne does identify are potential indicators, URLs that an endpoint may have visited. And the one highlight that we utilize quite a bit in SentinelOne is known as file fetch. So as a threat hunter, we may find files that look suspicious because of the processes they're being called from. And we may fetch that file from the endpoint and put it in a sandbox to see how the process rolls or dissect the binary.
All right, thank you, Lori. And Dale, yes, we will be sending out an email of the recording of today's session. So if anyone missed anything, there will be an email coming out with a link to watch that. So no problems there. All right, we do have a few more minutes. If anyone else has any questions to put in, we have a question here that says, what is the difference between a SOC analyst and a hunter?
Yeah, I can take that one. Working in both roles, I saw primarily as a SOC analyst, I'd be working alerts. An alert would trigger, I would triage that alert, action it as necessary, and move on to the next one. In my role as a threat hunter, it's much more of seeing what's going on, building a hypothesis around what I think could be happening, and then looking for it. There is really no alert that I'm working from. It's just more hunting, to put it that way.
All right, thank you, Todd. And then we have another question here. Are there key things I should look for in our network to see if we are secure enough?
I'll grab that one. So yes, there are a lot of things that you could check for in your network. One, you could see if all your vulnerabilities are patched. There are certain tools you can use. Qualys, if you have something like that, Nessus Scan. And then there are a few free vulnerability scanners. You can check and see if everything is patched. Firewalls being patched, IDS and firmware being patched are a couple of things that are really key in making sure you're secure. Also, local administrator accounts. We all are on a network, but multiple endpoints have their local administrator account active and enabled. A lot of times a script in an environment will create the password for that local administrator account, and it will be the same across the entire environment. You only need one computer to be compromised, and whatever application is installed under whatever user that installs it, they gain those permissions. So knowing how many administrative users you have that are local on your endpoints in your network is a key. Also, are there third-party usernames that maybe that vendor no longer has to log into your environment, but that username is still alive and well, but just hasn't been used in a while? Do you have critical devices? List of critical devices, and then a plan. So if you assume breach, what do you do with those devices? How do you get them off the line, or check your backup and run tests periodically to make sure that that plan is functioning and in place? Those are just a few that I can think of off the top of my head, Gina.
I might add to that real quick. Look at your MFA policy, that multi-factor authentication. And recently we've been seeing attacks where an adversary will bomb or repeatedly send a message to an MFA platform to get a user to click OK to allow access. So I would say, yes, use MFA, absolutely, but take that extra step and configure it to not use push notifications. If you can get your users to jump on board with that, I think it'll go a long way as well.
All right, thank you both. And I did see another question. So Stu, same thing as Stuart, you're asking a question about specific reporting that you get for using Newspire. So I appreciate you asking that here, and thank you for your business. But I will also pass that along over to our client team to go ahead and answer that for you. And I don't see any other questions for the team today. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But if anyone has questions that they think of, you can go ahead and email us at webinars@newspire.com. I can always route those to the correct person, or contact us through our website at newspire.com. Any closing thoughts from either of you, Lori and Todd?
I would just like to say thank you to everybody for joining our webinar to talk about our threat hunting program here.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. Thank you everyone for your time. Appreciate it.
All right, on behalf of Newspire and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.